Okay, this is a methods video for marking hoverflies with non-toxic enamel paint for identification purposes, in this case for captive breeding Blera fallax. This is the non-toxic enamel paint by Humbrol that I use. It's this typical, these tiny little tins that are used for painting models. And then, so you can see here, I've just been messing around with little bits of grass and a paintbrush. And I encourage you to do this and just have a go and seeing how you feel about using these different implements. So this is a really, really quite fine paintbrush, and this is my preferred tool. However, you can just use, this is just a little, it's basically dry grass, right? So just a tiny little dry dead piece of grass or a little twig. It has to be really quite thin because you don't want it to, as you touch down on the thorax of the insect, you don't want it to push too hard. You want it to have quite a lot of give, and that, as you can see, that's what's happening here. My blade of grass, and I dip it into the paint. Often you can get enough from actually the lid as well, which is quite useful. Just dip it into the paint. You get a tiny little blob on the end of your thin dried grass. Take it over to the insect. Imagine this is the insect, and just touch it very lightly with the end of the grass, and there you've got a little blob of the paint on the insect. So here is a hoverfly. When the hoverfly is in a tube, you might want to take advantage of phototaxis, where they like to go towards the light to get it in the right place. So if it started moving around, then I would try and get it to move towards light. So just a little touch with that tiny bit of paint onto the thorax. Another option is that you might consider a bit easier and safer so you don't damage the insect, is by gently restricting movement under a piece of netting. You can get plungers, which are queen marking kits, or you can just gently capture the insect between the netting and a piece of tissue like this. The fly here. Now, just going to mobilize it to the right spot on the tissue and then just get it to crawl in the right place. You might want to consider doing this when it's Blera in a safe environment, just in case they do escape, so you can capture one. So it's just a case of just making sure it can't move, gently stopping it from moving, and then you can hold it, just gently hold it in place between the netting and the tissue. You don't need to apply much pressure at all, but you do want to make sure that it's secure enough so then when you apply a spot of paint, it's not going to move. So here it's actually quite neatly into a crevice on the netting, and through the hole in the netting I'm applying a paint mark. I'm going to release it before it dries too much, just so it doesn't get stuck to the net, but I don't imagine that's going to be a problem. So here we are, the individual in the netting. Now you can use whatever you feel comfortable using. I've used kitchen paper here because it's quite soft. I've folded it up. This one's damp as well, so it might be it might feel better for you to use something that's a bit damp to give it a bit more give. You can use a sponge to hold the insect in place. Here we are, the paint mark on that individual. And it's absolutely fine. And I'll take it now to release it outside. Now you can mark different parts of the thorax. You can also get paint on the wings and they will fly, they will be fine. You can get paint, you can put marks on their legs. Ensure it's on the back legs just so they don't use their front legs while the paint is still wet to wipe their face or clean their eyes, because they will do that. So if you're going to mark their legs, then you want to make sure that they are that you don't allow them to move until the paint is dry. But whatever you do, you will always put a very small amount of paint onto their thorax. It's essential that it's a small amount. Of course, you want it to be seen, but in a captive environment like this, you really don't need to put very much on.